War I was an international conflict that drew soldiers from every corner of the world. It was the beginning of modern warfare as it saw the use of machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and airplanes for the first time. World War I started on July 28, 1914, and ended on November 11, 1918. Almost every European country was involved in the war, as well as several Middle Eastern and Asian countries. However, today I will persuade you to believe that one country's involvement was unnecessary to winning the war or bringing it to a quicker end. Many believe that America's involvement was crucial to winning the war, but its role has been vastly overvalued in both combat and logistical means. The Allied powers were able to eliminate the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East without the help of the Americans. The Allies were also making gains towards central homelands by the spring of 1918, pushing back the remaining Central armies. The Central Powers would have surrendered before the arrival of the Americans in the spring of 1918. America did not need to become involved in World War I because the Central Powers were already losing by a large margin. One common counterargument to this viewpoint is that America needed to join the war because the Germans sunk the supply ship Lusitania. The Lusitania was a supply ship hauling arms, munitions, and medical supplies to Britain and France, and had 128 Americans on board when it was sunk by a German submarine. However, the Germans may not have sunk the ship had America not been supplying only the Allies. If America had also been supplying Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or not supplying either side with arms and munitions at all, the Lusitania may not have been sunk. Another common rebuttal is that America needed to bring the war to a quicker end. World War I was, before America became involved, a classic Old World war. The Old World, as Richard J. Mayberry defines it in his book World War I, is any country residing on the continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia, with any country's colonies on other continents included with their parent country's troop counts. World War I and II, as Mayberry puts it, were typical garden variety European and Asian bloodbaths, the same horror that has been going on in the Old World for thousands of years. They did not become world wars until the USG, the United States government, got into them. If World War I was more of the same European and Asian squabbling, why send young American men to give their lives for something that America had no real stake in? One reason why America should have stayed out of the war is that the Allies had better military infrastructure. The Allies could produce arms and munitions faster than the Central Powers and could produce more in similar periods of time. The Allied supply lines were also better than the Central Powers, meaning they could move weapons, munitions, medical supplies, food, and soldiers quicker than the Central Powers could. The Ottoman Empire had great railroads and road systems which made for easy communication and troop movement, but for the rest of the Central Powers, logistics became a great weakness that would play into their ultimate defeat. The Allies had many troops at their disposal due to high feelings of nationalism and a growing sense of mistrust towards the Central Powers before the war. During the war, the Allies relied heavily on their colonies to help reinforce their armies with more soldiers. England alone drew troops from throughout Africa, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the British West Indies, India, and many other colonies in much smaller numbers. The French had Algeria, Senegal, Tunisia, Morocco, and French Indochina to conscript into service. This worldwide roster to draw troops from meant that the Allies had a practically unlimited number of soldiers and workers to keep the war machine running. While some of the Central Powers did have some colonies around the world, they were often too small to offer a meaningful number of available men for military service. The Central Powers did have larger standing armies at the beginning of the war, but as the war went on, the Allies proved that they had a greater numerical advantage in troops. Before the war, Britain and Germany got into a naval arms race, trying to outproduce each other in an effort to modernize and build up their navies. The Allied fleets were bigger and better than the Central Powers and succeeded in blockading Germany for the majority of the war. The Central Powers, namely Germany, had new modern fleets, but it did not have enough ships to break the Allied blockade. Naval warfare was key in the Allies' naval strategy, so Britain and France made sure to have good coordination in directing their fleets to important positions to maintain naval supremacy. Before the Americans were officially involved in World War I, the Allies were already making great gains on Central Powers' territories. The British in the Middle East were pushing back the Ottoman Empire, while in Europe, the Russians were making advances in the Eastern Front. In the Western Front, Britain and France were also pushing back the Germans. The European part of the Central Powers was becoming weaker all the time, as Italy switched sides and joined the Allies in hopes that it would gain territory at the war's end. Italy switched relatively early in the war, but had it not, the Central Powers could have had a fighting chance at winning. This betrayal severely weakened the Central Powers, and they would not fully recover from the loss of Italian troops and equipment. This pushing back of the Central Powers on all fronts by the Allies was happening in almost perfect unison, yet America still involved itself needlessly. These reasons are why I believe that America should not have gotten involved in World War I. The Allied powers were winning the war without our military assistance and would have been victorious either way. America should have stayed neutral and not supplied either side with any kind of aid or supplies for the war. American lives would not have been lost due to another old world war, and may even have kept America out of World War II as well. Thank you all for your time and for listening to this speech.